Fantastic. So we're so happy to preserve this conversation for those that couldn't join us in the moment. But as I was saying, you're welcome to pop your questions into the chat, your comments also. Feel free to interact with each other in the chat as well. So welcome officially to Book Nation by Jen's Book Club. We're so happy to have Sophfronia Scott. We're so happy to have read her beautiful novel, Wild, Beautiful, and Free. Such a mellifluous writing style, Sophfronia. It was such a joyous read. It was really just, I fell into that sort of rhythm immediately, which was so lovely and inviting. I think I've done all of our housekeeping chores, and I think if you agree, Jen, we can just go ahead and get started. I will unspotlight myself so the two of you can have the spotlight, and so I'll turn it over to our wonderful hostess, Jennifer Blankfein.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. So, Sophfronia, I'm going to start just reading a bit of your bio so that everyone gets to know a little bit about you, and then we'll jump in. Okay. So, Sophfronia Scott grew up in Lorain, Ohio, a hometown she shares with author Toni Morrison. She holds a BA in English from Harvard and an MFA in writing from Vermont College of Fine Arts. She began her career as an award-winning magazine journalist for Time, where she co-authored the groundbreaking cover story 20-something, the first study identifying the demographic group known as Generation X and People. When her first novel, All I Need to Get By, was published by St. Martin's Press in 2004, Sophfronia was nominated for Best New Author at the African American Literary Awards and hailed by Professor Henry Louis Gates Jr. as potentially one of the best writers of her generation. Sophfronia's other books include Unforgivable Love, Love's Long Line, Doing Business by the Book, The Seeker and the Monk, Everyday Conversations with Thomas Merton, and This Child of Faith, Raising a Spiritual Child in a Secular World, co-written with her son, Tane. Her essays, short stories, and articles have appeared in numerous publications, including Yankee Magazine, The Christian Century, North American Review, NewYorkTimes.com, and O, the Oprah Magazine. Her essays, Hope on Any Given Day, The Legs on Which I Move, and Why I Didn't Go to the Firehouse are listed among the notables in the Best American Essays series. Sophfronia is the recipient of a 2020 Artist Fellowship Grant from the Connecticut Office of the Arts. She has taught at Regis University's Mile High MFA and Bay Path University's MFA in Creative Nonfiction. She's also delivered craft talks and held workshops at the Yale Writers Workshop, Meacham Writers Workshop, and the Hobart Festival of Women Writers. Currently, Sophfronia is the founding director of Alma College's MFA in Creative Writing, a low residency graduate program based in Alma, Michigan. She lives in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. So welcome, Sophfronia, and thank you so much for being here. That's quite a bio. You're very accomplished. It's very impressive.
Thank you, Jennifer.
I really enjoyed your book. Here's your book. We could show everybody, Wild, Beautiful, and Free. I loved the pace of it. It was emotional. It was purposeful, and I'm excited to hear all about it from you. So let's start first, though, about you a little bit.
Yeah.
Have you always been a writer?
Yeah, I've been playing around with words. I've been writing since I was a kid, even before I knew what being a writer was. I liked looking at books. I loved reading books. I loved copying out, sentences from books. But I didn't have a concept of what being a writer was, but I just did it. So it's kind of like asking me, what's that thing on the end of your shoulder? It's like, oh, this arm? I've always had this arm. So I've always been writing one way or another.
Did you keep a diary as a child, or do you have anything that you wrote when you were young like that?
Oh goodness. I have to clear out the attic in our house. I might find a diary, this little purple book that I used to keep when I was very young. That may still be around. I don't know. And some of my blank books, I think, still exist with poems and things that I wrote in high school. But that's about it. Yeah.
Wow. So what inspires you to write? Where do you get your ideas? How do you know what you're going to write about?
It's different when I write nonfiction, I feel like I'm answering a question. But when I write fiction, it's like there's a story. There's something there that's intriguing me. There's something that I want to say. And it's almost like the characters are already coming to me, and it's coming together with something that I want to express. And it just sort of bubbles about that way, and it just comes up.
Wow. So with this book, Wild, Beautiful, and Free, how long did this take you to write?
The writing itself wasn't that long, probably about 18 months, but I've been thinking about this book for years. And, back when I first sold my second novel, I sold back in 2016, and I was telling that editor about this book then, right? That it was still in the idea phase, but I long wanted to tell like my version of the book Jane Eyre, because I knew that there were things I wanted to express through that story, and I wanted to create a very powerful female character who was a woman of color. So so the idea was around and in me for a very long time, but it just needed the right opportunity and time in which to finally get it done.
So you read Jane Eyre probably when you were young.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
this
was about 13.
So this was percolating all this time, or can you tell us just a brief summary of Jane Eyre so we know how it might relate to your book?
Yeah, Jane Eyre is an orphan and she lives in early 1800s in England. So she's an orphan. Her aunt, who is not really her blood aunt, it's aunt through marriage, resents raising her with her children. And so she sends her off to this school for orphans, essentially. And that's where she stays. And she eventually becomes a teacher. And she leaves to become a governess and falls in love with this mysterious man named Mr. Rochester. And her life sort of becomes evolved around him.
So she has a Mr. Rochester and we have a Mr. Colchester.
Yeah.
Is that
there are certain notes that I felt like I wanted to keep,
So that's why you kept that name or a similar name, and also right. Jeanette and Jane Eyre, is that
exactly yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a sister named Jeanette?
I do, but she's only one N, not two.
I noticed that. I noticed that because my grandmother's name was Jeanette and she was one N also. But I saw in the very beginning where you dedicated the book to your sisters, and I saw that your one sister's name's Jeanette, and I wondered if she felt like this was for her.
Well, I feel like all aspects of the people around us whom we love show up in our characters, whether we realize it or not. And there have been times when I have intentionally written about certain people just because I love their personalities and I wanted to, create a character around that personality. But I think I may have, even when I started this book, I may have told Jeanette, just so you know, I'm writing this book, but it's not about you, but I'm using this name.
That's
so
right.
I let her know. But at the same time, Jeanette Beben is a beloved child, right? She has a powerful father, and my sisters and I experienced that, right? So we had a very powerful father who loved us very well, and so it just made sense to me to dedicate this book to my sisters.
It's beautiful, beautiful. So when you wrote this book, did you share it with anybody beforehand? Did you workshop it or anything like that?
Actually, I didn't, and I can't even tell you why that was. I don't workshop things a lot anymore. Like usually it's my agent that looks at things. But when I was working on this book, only one person read the draft, and that was Don Daniels, the owner of Ballyhoo Books in Michigan, in Alma, Michigan, because I just felt like I wanted her eye on it. She's also a spiritual person. She's the owner of a bookstore, and I just wanted to see what the book looked like through her eyes. So she read it, and of course my editor read that draft, and that was it. We went from there.
That's crazy. Right?
What?
I mean,
What do you mean?
well, usually authors like have people read it and, just to get their ideas. That it's amazing that you did the whole thing without anyone really seeing it.
Yeah, no, usually I will have specific people in mind. I don't, my second novel was written while I was still in the MFA program, but there was like a certain reader, like I think there was a man that I had read that book because one of the main characters, the story is told through the eyes of a man, and there are baseball things in there. So I wanted this particular man to read the book to see how it went. And another woman who I felt was the ideal reader for the book. So that's how I think about it. I have people like that read it. So I'm curious to see how a reader experiences it, because I feel like I will get the writing feedback. My editor, my agent, they will tell me what I need to do with it in terms of writing. So yeah, I maybe it's because I've been through so many workshops and things before. I mean, I've been having my work edited by editors since I was a journalist. So I don't know, maybe I have a different sort of sensibility around it, but yeah, I didn't. I usually, I don't. I get the feedback that is this working the way that I think it's working? And once I know that, I can just keep going.
Right. That's great. You can actually be both the reader and the writer with your experience.
Yeah.
So I was lucky enough to attend your book launch, and it was really very moving. You read an excerpt from the book and you became emotional, as if you were a reader, reading somebody else's words. Your own words were so moving and you were moved by them, which was really such a beautiful thing to see. And of course, everyone in the audience was moved as well. But does that happen often? Are you moved by your own writing while you're writing, during the writing process, or when you're reading it after?
That was a particularly emotional section, and I do write with a lot of emotion. That tends to happen more when I'm writing nonfiction, right? So like I will be sitting here crying while working on something nonfiction, but that was unusual with fiction for that to happen to me. And I think I mentioned to you that I hadn't read that part of the book in a long time, and so it brought me back to what I was trying to express there, and to feel the truth of what I wanted to say in those words. It was very important to me, and those characters take on a life of their own. So yeah, it was, I'm an emotional writer, so if I'm not feeling it, then I have no chance of making you or anybody else feel it, right?
It must have felt really great, though, to just be able to react to your own words as a reader and feel what you wanted people to feel when you were creating it as the writer. It was like mission accomplished.
That's interesting. I'm not sure I think about it in that way, but I'm so happy that this book is in the world. I love this story, and I love the things that it says. So yeah, in that respect, mission accomplished. If other people are being touched by this, yeah, I've done my job.
So when you write, do you create an outline? How do you organize your thoughts, with the story and the
Yeah,
chapter?
I will do an initial outline, and because I need to know, does the story work? Can I carry it through for 300 pages? And also, a novel has to be aiming for a certain point, right? There needs to be a climax moment. So that, to me, that needs to be planned. I have to know what is it that I'm aiming for, and I need every chapter to move toward that point. Now, that doesn't mean I stick to the outline, because the characters and events take on a life of its own, but it helps to know the structure that I'm working with. Some of that was initially the Jane Eyre structure, right? So I had a certain kind of event timeline, based on that. But and when you think about who Jane Eyre was, not a lot happens to Jane Eyre, right? So I I wanted a little more action for Jeanette, and Jeanette does take on kind of like an action hero persona in certain ways, right? She's in dangerous situations. She carries a gun from time to time, right? She's in a war. So so it's not like that structure for Jane Eyre was going to totally hold, but the same concepts are happening there of moving on when she needs to move on, of leaving Colchester, and you know, is there going to be a return? You know, these questions are all still in there. They just play out in different ways.
Yeah. So Jeanette, she does move quite a bit. She has different parts of her life are with all different people.
Yeah.
How do you keep track of all those characters, and do you develop them separately, or do they develop as you're writing them in the story?
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like, to me, it's like, how do we keep track of the people in our lives? Right? We all have tons of people in our lives when you think about it. So to me, and you know, you and I were talking about that before. You sent me a question about that, and I was like, wow, you know, I never even really thought about that before. You know, I do try to keep track of characters, but mainly in terms of names, right? The hard part for me is naming people and naming them accurately according to the time. So finding the right names, but thinking about them in terms of personalities. And this is where it helps if I'm basing a character off of somebody I know, because then I'm not going to mix them up with somebody else, because it's easy to give them a certain persona, you know, based on something that I already know. So it wasn't difficult to keep track of them, and also because they're in different areas of her life. Like some of those people are there, you know, where she's in Philadelphia, and you don't see them again. So that's not too difficult. And maybe that's the way my brain thinks. You know, there are certain movies, I think of one in particular. There are certain movies, when you look at the credits, it will give you the credits divided by location. So when the story was here, you know, and when it was here, and you have all of the characters divided in that way. So I guess my brain had that same organizing thinking.
And it also sounds like when you're creating these characters, you're really picturing them as a whole person.
Yeah.
So you can distinguish one from the other.
Yeah, and thinking about what they sound like.
Right.
Right. So, and also that's important, because, you know, this is a first person story. So you're hearing them also through Jeanette's ear. So they have to have a distinctive voice, but you're also trying to communicate it through someone else's voice.
It's really special, because as a reader, if I were to sit down to write something, I think it would be really challenging for me to be able to figure out all the characters and follow them through, you know, just because my brain doesn't work that way and I'm not a writer. So it's definitely a different way of looking at it. I think if you're a writer, you have to look at it as, you know, as these characters being real people, and
Yeah,
it makes that easier to.
And to think of it in terms of the story.
Yeah.
Right. So Fanny is not just some girl that Jeanette gets thrown into room with. This is someone who is there to teach her certain things about faith. This is someone who is influencing her in terms of thinking about forgiveness and endurance. Right. So it's not just about, okay, you know, okay, she goes here and she meets a girl. Well, no, this is a very particular part of Jeanette's journey. So who is going to influence her in this way, and who is this girl meant to be, right? So it's like building the character from the inside out of what their purpose in the story is.
Right. Could you give us just a brief synopsis of the story, just in case there are people that haven't finished it or haven't read it yet, so that when we talk about characters a little bit more, they'll know how everything fits in?
Yeah. So Jeanette is the daughter of an enslaved woman and a plantation owner in Louisiana. And Jeanette's mother dies in childbirth, and her father, Jean Bevin, takes her into the house, and actually she was already there because the slave was giving birth in the house. So he keeps her and raises her as his daughter, along with his daughter with his wife. And he keeps her very close because he knows his wife is not happy about having this infiltrator in their home. So he teaches her about the land. He teaches her to read, and she's an educated child. And he sets aside land specifically for her because he knows that as a mixed race person, it's not going to be easy for her in the world. But the thing is, he dies. He dies when she's about 12 years old. And his wife sells Jeanette into slavery. And she gets sent to Mississippi to another plantation. So the novel is the story of how she escapes, how she makes her way north, and how she's making her way in the world as someone, a mixed race person who really in 1800s United States really doesn't have a place in the world. She's not Black, she's not white. There are things that she cannot do because she's a woman of color. So she's making her way in the world, but at the same time trying to figure out who she is and what does love mean to her. And can she get back home to claim that birthright, that land that her father has set aside for her? But and she meets Colchester. She goes to work in this village of freed slaves, and this is in Ohio, and she becomes the school teacher in that community. And she falls in love with the white man who has set up this community. But when they have their falling out, she leaves, and she ends up in the Civil War, working as a nurse.
She's really a superhero. I mean, you want to root for her the whole time. She has all the odds are against her. Not all the odds, a lot of the odds are against her. She was smart and she was tough. It's such a great story. Now, was it an easy decision for you to have this book set during the Civil War? Did that come to you right away, that's when you wanted it to be set?
That made sense to me because I wanted to create a character who, just like Jane Eyre, who didn't have a place in the world. And I knew she would be a mixed race character. So to me, that moment in history would be like Civil War era America, right? And that just made sense to me. And also, it didn't occur to me until I was in it writing the book, how much of that era was already in me because of things I had taken in as a child, right? So I saw Roots when I was like 11-year-old, the miniseries. I saw the miniseries North and South multiple times, throughout, my teen years and going into college. And in high school, that was the one war that we were taught pretty thoroughly. So I understood the battles of the Civil War. So it was interesting to get started on it and to realize how much of it I already knew.
Which probably makes it a little bit easier to really be able to visualize the setting.
Yes. Yeah.
Are there any characteristics that Jeanette has that you relate to, that you feel are you shining through her character? There's a little bit of a skepticism about the world that Jeanette has when she's younger. That when I was writing it, I was kind of laughing because I think, that's me. And it's the part where she and her sister, her half sister Callista, are playing together as children, and they are pretending to be wise women giving advice, and Jeanette is less merciful because she's thinking, well, these people should know better, and why don't they know better? Because people are always telling me as a child, well, you should know better. You're a big girl, you should know better. Well, why are these adults behaving the way that they're behaving? And so I remember always having that same kind of bewilderment, even now. Right. So I see things in the news and I'm like, what? And so, but Callista reminds her to have mercy and compassion. And I always, remind myself to go back to the compassion point. I even keep,
I have a star here that says compassion on my desk to remind me of that. Like, yeah, they should know better, but you don't know what's going on with people.
Right.
So
Well,
I laughed when that came up. Like, yeah.
that's funny because so you're really both part Jeanette and part Callista, because you're reminding yourself about being
Yeah.
compassionate at the same time that you're
Exactly.
so
Exactly.
you're mixed in to both of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, Jeanette and Callista, let's talk a little bit about their relationship.
Mhm.
Callista, she stands up for Jeanette, but I felt like she should have been a little bit stronger even. I don't know I wonder what other people think about how Callista stood up for her sister, if everyone thought that she did a good job with that, if she did enough. So if anyone has a comment about that, let us know. But what did you,
Yeah.
how did you think about this relationship?
Yeah, I feel as though Callista stood up for her in the ways that she could, in the ways that she knew how, right? So what was the thing that she could wield, right? Which was the thing about marriage, right? Her mother wants to marry her to into a wealthy family, and she refuses. So she wielded the one tool that she had. But I think that Jeanette and Callista were raised very differently. So, if the tables were turned, Jeanette would be drawing upon a very different set of skills and abilities and strengths, right, to stand up for her sister. And really, though, and I can't remember if I told you about this, Jennifer, with those two characters, I was really working through, again, something from my childhood, because I was trying to redeem Missy Ann from the miniseries Roots, because that character, for some reason, is still on my soul all these years later. That character was played by Sandy Duncan, and to this day, I still think about that scene. If you guys don't know the storyline of Roots, the main character of Kunta Kinte has a daughter named Kizzy, and she becomes friends with the white girl in the big house, and as children, and they play together, and Missy Ann teaches Kizzy to read. But when they become older, and it becomes apparent that Kizzy can read, and she's even written a pass for someone, they sell her away, and they put her in a cart, and they're taking her away, and she is just screaming for Missy Ann. And I even went and looked up the scene in the book, and you see these big capital letters, Missy Ann, and she just drawn out, she's screaming for her. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they must have Missy Ann locked up somewhere. She can't go help Kizzy. Isn't this terrible? But then they cut to Missy Ann, and she's sitting there in her room ever so calmly. She might have even been drinking some tea, just listening to the screams and just saying, "Stupid girl," or something like that, but does nothing. And I just felt that sense of betrayal so deeply. I could not believe it. And so I knew when I was writing these characters, I'm like, okay, I'm always all about redemption. I'm going to redeem that Missy Ann. This is what she should have done. Right? This is what she should have done. Right? But that's the fun thing about being a writer. We get to do that.
Right. You can do whatever you want. I mean, I'm glad that
Yeah.
she did stand up for her in the ways that she did. Jeanette, when she was younger, her father would teach her about the land, and she memorized all the different parcels of the land.
Yeah.
He didn't do that with Callista, right?
No.
So she was educated, but she didn't have the same kind of values that Jeanette learned from her father.
Right.
So it's a little different, even though they were sisters and they were in the same house.
Yeah. And you think about, even, early on when she's a baby, right? He is carrying her in a sling type thing as he goes out into the field, because he does not dare leave the baby alone, right? So she has been with her father, throughout her toddlerhood, throughout her early childhood. She has been with him almost every day, right? So there's a different bond there, and a different connection and strength that Jeanette gained from him.
It must have been a great marriage, huh? A lot of tension.
Yeah, yeah, really.
All right, let's talk about Christian Colchester.
Yeah.
So he has a different kind of mindset than Jeanette, and he's okay as passing as a white man. And she is not okay with that. She does not like that about him, and she doesn't like to do it herself, even though she can. What makes him change, and why are they so different, and why did he come around to her thinking in the end?
Yeah. In a certain way, he's been forced into that mindset, because this is what he has had to do, and he doesn't even really have a sense of himself as a mixed race person, and Jeanette even challenges him on that. You don't know who you are, and that is part of what attracts him to her. That she is so self-contained and so one. She is not split. She has a certain wholeness about her, and he wants that, right? He wishes that he could be that way, and it's interesting that that he eventually acquires that by being away from her, right? So that's interesting to me, but yeah, it's a very different thing, right? And also Jeanette is very aware of that line because of what she's lived, right? She's been raised as in her father's White House, but she's also been a slave, right? So she has had to incorporate these two aspects of herself in ways that Christian has not.
Right. She could have easily fallen to the same thought process that he was at, and said, you know what, it's easier for me to pass as a white woman, and I'm going to try and do that.
Yeah.
And she didn't, because it wasn't who she really was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I don't know if did you read The Personal Librarian?
No, what is that?
The Personal Librarian, we read it in Book Nation. It's by Marie Benedict and Victoria Christopher Murray. And Marie Benedict is a historical fiction author, and she's white, and she writes primarily about famous people in a fictional setting background. And she had this idea to write about Belle DaCosta Green, who was J.P. Morgan's personal librarian. But she didn't want to write the book by herself because she's white, and she didn't know if she would be able to represent the main character properly. The main character was mixed race, and she passed as white and had this job with J.P. Morgan, a big job.
Wow.
So she asked Victoria Christopher Murray, who is a Black author, to co-write the book with her. And it's a fantastic book. And the story is about a woman who, she's very strong, but she chooses to pass as white because she's able to have this amazing job and make a lot of money, and she supported her family. She was forced to do it. If she said who she was, she would have lost her job. And so she kept, she was strong. She was strong, but she made that choice to be white. And in Jeanette's case, she's strong and made the case that she was not a white woman and that she was mixed. So it's interesting because all these different characters, they have this opportunity to make a choice on how they want other people to see them. And that's what's going to determine if they feel whole or not.
So what happened when she makes the decision to be that character, the decision to be white? Because it's usually portrayed like, if you read Britt Bennett's The Vanishing Half,
Mhm.
or the book Passing by Nella Larson, the character who passes is usually shown to be kind of not whole, like that person is lonely. You often see them secretly seeking the companionship of Black people. So how was it for that character?
Um, she, oh, yeah, somebody's just said, actually, she wasn't mixed race. She was light-skinned Black, and
Okay,
she passed as white. That is true. Yes.
okay.
Yeah, she never got married. She never had children on purpose because
Mm,
she wouldn't know what the kid would look like.
right.
So she definitely wasn't whole.
Yeah.
She was successful, and there were aspects of her life that were great, and she earned a lot of respect, and no one really knows if JP Morgan knew who she really was or not. It never came out until after her death.
Wow.
Um, but it's an interesting story. You know, it's an interesting topic.
Yeah.
The vanishing half also,
Yeah.
with, two sisters, and one is married to a Black man and has a Black child, and the other marries a white, or was married to a white person and passes as white, and they become totally different people.
Yeah. And they were twins, remember?
Right.
They're not just sisters, they're twins.
Twins.
Yeah. So there's an article on Literary Hub that I wrote. It's called "The Soul of a New Narrative," and it's about exactly this, about changing the story of the mulatto, the trope of the tragic mulatto character, and books that are seeking, like mine, that are seeking just to tell a different story.
Yeah. Okay, let's just see what we have here. Oh, let's talk about Silas.
Yes.
So Silas and Jeanette, they're friends, but he seems to, I think he seems to want more, or he wants companionship, or he wants her to go with him to Atlanta. And she says no.
Mhm.
What would have happened if she said yes? And did you ever explore the idea of her going with him? Or did you always know she wasn't going to?
Yeah, I knew she wouldn't. And he's changed a lot. He changed a lot from when she first met him to that moment where he's wanting her to go to Atlanta. But the other thing is that, and Jeanette says this very early on in the book, she understands what love is, right? She knows what it is to be loved, especially after her experience with Christian Colchester. She knows what it is when she is in love, and she really, she's not one to settle. So why would she go with this person? And she would probably come to realize that she is not living her life. She's really living his. And that would not have been acceptable to her. And she knows that she deserves more.
She had a strong constitution to make a lot of these decisions along the way, because she could have easily had weak moments and done different things and made different choices, but she knew who she was.
Well, and also she gained inspiration from the people who have loved her. So there are specific moments in the book where, or even, Fanny says to her, well, act like your father. What would your father be doing? Right. So my father would be standing up for the people that he loves. So she acts like him for a while. Right. She knows what it is to be a beloved woman. So I'm going to stand here and stand up for myself, because this is what my sister would have done, or this is what Fanny would have done, or she already has those models. So she has the self-esteem to carry it through on her own.
Yeah. And Fanny was kind of like the angel on her shoulder, like
Yeah.
telling her, giving her
Yeah.
inspiration.
Yes. Yeah.
And so what about Dorinda? Tell us a little bit about her.
Yeah, Dorinda is is like almost like the fairy godmother, I guess you could say. If Dorinda is Fanny is the angel, I guess Dorinda is like the fairy godmother, who when you think about it, she's not in the book that much, and yet she has a huge effect, right? From she gives Jeanette the story of her birth, right? She was there, right? She knows something terrible is about to happen to Jeanette, right? She's the one who gives her the stone and the dream, right? To give this to her, you will come back, you can come back here, right? And to let her know that even that's possible, to plant that seed in her, right? So Dorinda is a powerful character, and I love the way she shows up again in Jeanette's life, and again continues to encourage and inspire her. And I think she's the one character where she is not based on any one particular person that I know. It's almost like she stands in for all of the strong Black women in the world, the ancestors, so to speak, right?
Yeah, and I think the rock part was genius, because even though she wasn't in the story all that much, that rock was her, right?
Yeah.
So like she, that was part of the story the whole time.
Yeah.
And at the end, when I found out about her fate, I was crying. I mean, that really touched me, because I felt so strongly about her and their relationship, their connection, which made me think about all of the relationships in this book, and Jeanette's relationship with the women. I felt like were strong and were gave her what she needed. She got a lot of encouragement and a lot of drive from all of these women and all of the relationships that she had with them, more than the men. The men, like the love interest part I liked also, but that didn't make her who she was. That was what she was looking for. All the women made her who she was.
Yeah, and some of that is part of the time, right? So just in the 1800s, it's not like a woman would spend a lot of time with men. But some of that is also inspired by this novel that Toni Morrison wrote. It's a little novel, really little novel. It's called Home. And it takes place right after World War II. But there's a female character in it who has terrible physical trauma, but she makes it. Her brother finds her and brings her back to the country in the South, and she is essentially healed and mentored by this group of women, right? And it just felt right that is the overtone, right? That we have. Gosh, there's a wonderful musical about that's based on Jane Eyre, and there's a wonderful line in it that says, there is another world that watches us. I'm not afraid. The angels know when we have sinned or we have been betrayed, and that the ancestors like they are watching us, right? And so to me that's present, whether they're physically there like Dorinda, or when they pass on, there is this sense of strong women upholding strong women.
Wow. Yeah. So did you do additional research for this book? I mean, it seems like you had inspiration from Jane Eyre and Home, written by Toni Morrison, and Roots, and all kinds of things that were in your life that really didn't have anything to do with the book, but all impacted this story. Yeah. Did you do any additional research to fill in, the gaps here? So
to me, research comes in, I will write and write and write without research, but then when it comes to a point, like there's a point where I need to know a specific thing, right? So that's when I go and do the research. So, I wrote, so I do research on what is a plantation, what is a Louisiana plantation like, how big could it be, and how does it work to process sugarcane, like all of these things. So that'll get me through the first part of the book. Okay, now she's about to go into slavery. All right, now what is that going to be like? And then I start reading, like Diary of a Slave Girl and other slave narratives. But then I actually got stuck, right? I'm not sure I told you this. I got stuck because, and I didn't know for the longest time, because I'm not usually somebody who experiences writer's block. And it occurred to me that my block was around writing the slavery part of the book. And I knew it was because it was going to be sad and tough to write. I even skipped and started writing some other parts of the book, and because I wasn't there. But then it came to me that the reason I couldn't write it was because I didn't want to write this dark, I didn't want to write the same narrative that we already know about slavery, right? I wanted it to somehow have some hope, especially in terms of the escape, right? So I just could not bring myself to write a scene of Jeanette running through the woods and being chased by dogs. That just did not interest me. It felt limiting. I finally, picking up books and looking through books, and I found this little book that I bought actually at a used book sale at my local library, this book called Runaway Slaves. And it was like these brief narratives of slaves that had run away. And that's where I found the story of Ellen and William Craft, who escaped by dressing her up as a man and having her husband pretend to be her slave. And when I read that, I was just energized by it. I was like, that is amazing. That is just brilliant. There's actually there's a whole book about them that just came out. And we actually even have the same agent. How weird is that? But I saw this story and I said, this is the way that Jeanette should escape. But me feeling that energy, that's what made me realize that I want to write something that's empowering and not limiting, right? I don't want the reason I was stuck is because I didn't want to write a narrative that was already out there. So how do I write something that despite the darkness, that there still is a sense of hope, a sense of redemption, a sense of moving forward? And so reading those stories helped me to understand that block. And once I understood that, I could go back in and write that part of the book.
And that's actually it probably ended up being sort of a fun scene to write, as opposed to what could have been, just the idea of getting dressed up and, it was not as graphic and horrific as it could have been.
Yeah, I don't know if fun is the right word, but empowering is what I think
Right.
about it. Empowering, yeah.
And also in a different creative kind of way too.
Yeah. And usually, that's how my research goes. It's like, okay, I don't need to read about the whole Civil War, but where is Jeanette, and where would she most likely be involved with the things that have happened in the Civil War? Okay, she's in Ohio, she's doing this way. Okay, she may run into this particular battle. Okay, then she's going to try to head south. So Shiloh, it makes sense that she would be involved in the Battle of Shiloh. And so then I'm going to read about Shiloh and figure out which aspects of that battle would fit the storyline. I learned about Mother B. The Mother B character is a real person. It's like, okay, so this is perfect because she's going to be a nurse, and this is the person who helps her do that. And so it's like, I don't want research. I'm not a writer who's like, get all stuck in research and never do the writing. To me, the research has to serve the writing. So it's like, okay, what is the story that I'm telling, and what research do I need to support the story?
Do you find it easier to write fiction or nonfiction?
They're different. They're both very different. And fiction, of course, is easier because I can make stuff up, right?
Right.
But nonfiction can be scary in that it's not really possible to outline it. Like sometimes, I can think I know what I'm writing about when I start an essay, but there's an ongoing inquiry that's going on. And sometimes I may be writing about something that I didn't realize I was writing about. And that can be a painful thing that I end up, going down the road into.
And do do you write the essays at the same time that you're writing fiction? I mean, can you be working on two different things at the same time that are very different?
Sometimes, because that's just, if someone asks me to write something, I can't just say, well, I can't do it right now. I'm working on a novel, come back in 6 months. So sometimes I'll have to put something down and be working back and forth. But I'm used to doing that.
I'm just popping in to remind everyone, if they do have questions, this would be a great time to put them in the chat. And while I do that, I actually have a question myself I would love to ask. So since we're talking sort of about process, one of the things that I found really seamless in your book is that you make some time leaps that are a sentence long or two, that without me feeling like I've missed out on anything. And I was just curious if in the editing process, if that was something that you struggled with to move her along time-wise, or if that just came naturally for you.
Time is very important. There's a whole lecture actually that I do on navigating a novel through time, because so many writers just kind of write, especially people who don't write without outlines. They're kind of like writing into a void. But part of the editing process is you have to make sure you have strong time markers in there. Transitions are important, especially when you have a person who is growing up throughout the book, right? You really need strong time markers to ground the reader in this whole sea. Well, where are you? When are you? Right? So yeah, I pay attention to those things. It can be really hard. Like those were, when I was working on my first novel, almost all of the notes from my agent were about time. Well, when did this happen, and what is that? And but if you do it right, as you noticed, if you do it right and you do it well, the book moves.
And you did it right, and you did it well, and it really was. I took note of that, because I was like, wow, we've moved it 3 months, or we've moved a year, and it feels just like very natural. So.
Yeah.
So if this book became a movie, it would be a great movie. Who would you cast in the film?
I don't know, because I really am not aware of the mixed race actors right now, and who that would be, or even the look. I actually found a picture of someone who I thought looked like Jeanette, and she's not a known actress. This is just a young woman who lives in Colorado, and I just happened to see her in a blog post about something else. I was like, oh my gosh, that's Jeanette. And I even sent the picture to my editor, like, this is Jeanette. And but it's different. And
Right, casting could be a challenge.
Yeah. But I think about, there was a movie called Eve's Bayou that was out many years ago now. And I think about some of those actors that, like, he's not a no name. He was a soap opera actor, but he's one of the people in that movie who could pass for white, right? Depending on how he styles his hair. But he would be too old to be Colchester now, but it would be an actor like that. But if you notice, we have so many different looks of actors right now. Like if you think about the actors on Bridgerton, or if you watch TV, there are a lot of ads right now for that movie called Chevalier, right? So you have these characters who are of color, and some are even pretty fair-skinned, but not in a way that would pass for white, right? And I wonder if that's because they don't want to confuse people. That like, if they want a person of color in this role, you'll know that it's a person of color. But would it be confusing if unless you're presenting the actor as that, right? Even they did the movie about passing, right? And I'm not sure if that character.
They shot that in black and white.
Yes, they did. So it's hard to tell.
Right, to help make it more vague.
Yeah.
which was interesting, right?
Yeah, so it would be very tricky. It would be very tricky. I'm curious how they would do that.
Yeah, but it would be a powerful movie. It would be visually, it could be really great.
Yeah, and when you consider how many different movies of Jane Eyre have been made, it was like I'll be really surprised if there isn't any interest in this.
Yeah, so are you shopping it out?
That's up to my agent. So they usually do that, and they only come to me when they have a producer. But even that takes a long time.
Right.
They've been shopping my previous novel now for quite a while, and that does have a producer working on it. So it just takes time.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So, how did you get connected with Lake Union Publishing? How did the publisher story happen for you?
Well, it was my agent's idea, um, and we talked about it, because I've worked with big five publishing houses before, and I wasn't sure, what this would be like, and because it is Amazon, right?
Right.
It's Amazon, and we had a long talk about it, because they were interested, and we had a Zoom call with the woman who acquired it, who is also the editorial director of Lake Union, and I liked her, and she was very excited about the book, and I said, okay, well, let's give this a go, and they've been absolutely amazing, from the production quality of the book to the way they've gotten it out in front of people. I've never in my career had as many ratings and reviews on Amazon as I do right now. Like, it's well over 8,000 at this point.
Wow,
So,
that's
you know,
impressive.
yeah,
That's
so
great.
that's all I can ask for. It's like, okay, I want people to read my book, and they can get it in front of people as only Amazon can. So it's really cool.
That's great. Yeah, I feel like they have done really well with a lot of books recently. I don't know if you read The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell.
No.
That was a great book. That's Lake Union. And
Mhm.
have you seen Louis Velez? That was also really great book by Catherine Ryan Hyde. And they did Beneath the Scarlet Sky.
Yes.
So that
Yes,
one,
that was a beautiful book. Yeah.
and I think that's going to be a movie, I believe.
Wow.
So they've done a lot, and those are just recent ones that I know Lake Union has done. So
Yeah.
that was good. Um, the book is gorgeous. The cover, I love the color, and I love everything about it. Can you tell us a little about the cover?
Well, the cover, I'm grabbing my copy here because I don't know if you have the hardcover or not, but
Yeah,
when you take off, when you take off the hardcover, right, it's just, that is stunning.
that's
Um,
incredible.
so the cover, they gave us different looks, but this was the one that everybody loved. And the colors, I just found the colors really striking. Um, Leslie Worrell designed this cover. And my only note, which, as a writer, I don't really expect my thoughts to be taken seriously with the cover. I'm not really a visual person, and the marketing people know what they're doing. But the one change I just suggested, I just happened to say, well, I really love the trees that I mentioned in the book, and these trees weren't in the original. I said, I feel like there should be trees around that house the way I talk about the trees, and boom, in the next version, there it was. I was like, oh, wow, that's so cool, right?
That's
So
nice that they incorporated that for you too, because
yeah,
like you had a part in it, because it really, the cover is so nice.
yeah.
What's
And I
inside.
also,
So,
my editor and I also discussed that, with the title, right, coming up with this title, and I just said, okay, if we go with this title, I just feel like we can't have people on the cover of this book. It would just feel too much like a romance novel, which it is not. So so I was happy that the landscape is there, right? That Catalpa Valley is there.
yeah, no, I think it's great. I love it. Um, let's just see. Do you have anything else in the works now that this one is out in the world? Do you have projects?
I always have projects. Yeah,
Like,
I'm working on another novel. I think it's going to be like World War II era book. But I was just in a class when I have one of my books is an essay collection, and someone asked me about, my next essay collection. And I said, well, I hadn't thought about it, but then I started counting. I was like, well, wait a minute. I didn't realize that I've written a ton of essays since that last book. So I have enough essays to start a new essay collection. And I just realized, I guess I should be doing that too. So yeah, I'm still working on essays, and I'll do another novel. I tend to go back and forth between fiction and nonfiction, but I may do this next novel first and then get the essay collection done.
wow, okay. And is there anything that you can tell us about the book that you wrote with your son, and how old was he, and how much how much impact did he have on the book?
Well, that book, I just knew I wasn't going to write it without him, because Tane is the sage. He was 12 when we wrote that book. So the book that Jennifer is referring to tell everyone, is a book called This Child of Faith, Raising a Spiritual Child in a Secular World. And this book came about, and I told you just, earlier, I said, I tend to write nonfiction to answer questions. I see questions that people have, and a book, if I can write a book that will answer that, okay. So so that book came about because my son was in a documentary that actually came out 7 years ago this month, in fact, a documentary called Midsummer in Newtown, which is a documentary about the theater project, the resiliency program that was created in the wake of the shootings and in our town, the Sandy Hook shootings. And my son is a Sandy Hook survivor. And there was a moment in that film when the director asked Tane, what is the most important thing in your life? And, we're expecting to hear something about Pokemon or, some such video game. And he was 9 at the time that this was filmed. And he just said, God, without hesitation, God. And it was such a drop the mic moment. And when we did press for the film, we were getting questions about it, how is he like that? And, why does he have faith, and all of these things? And so, so I decided, well, why don't I just tell the story about our family's faith journey? And because Tane is the sage, I created an outline and told him, I want you to, give me your take on this. So each chapter has, a few paragraphs from him called Tane's Take, and that's how it went. And it was a really great experience because he came to understand what I do, because I had the publishing company. I said, make sure his name is on the contract. He should sign the contract. And having to nudge him just in the same way of doing homework, like Tane, we have a deadline, editor is emailing us, and we can't give the advance back because we went to Harry Potter World. We have to get moving. But what was really wonderful about it, what was truly wonderful, was after the book came out, that he and I did speaking engagements together, right? And it has led him to give voice to his own thoughts about what it is to write about spirit. He started working on his own Japanese manga, a spiritual story about a boy, and he writes regularly now. He just finished his first year of college, and he writes on his own, right? So he works on his own projects, and he has no hesitation that these projects can be brought to fruition because he's already done it before with me. So that's exciting. That's exciting to me.
Wow. So he is a writer. He is a writer.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's incredible. And had he ever written anything before this project together?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think he would talk in terms of stories, right? And he was aware of stories because he likes anime. But I think this was the first time he really had to sit down and write something out. And when you do that, and I remember the first time I actually wrote something out, it really takes a lot longer than you realize. And it's like, oh my gosh, you know, what am I doing here? What have I gotten myself into? But if you know that you can finish, I think that's a truly powerful thing. You know, he sent me, he's in one of the classes he took this term was animation. And of course, you know, they do the final projects, and he's working on this with 2 other students. And I'm getting the sense that, okay, I think he's creating something that's much longer than that need be, right? And so, yeah, you have students turning in 2-minute projects, but he's created this whole 21-minute thing that contains 3 types of animations, his and the 2 other students. But you get to the end of the video, it says, written by Tane Gregory. So he wrote the whole script for this project. So it's what he does, and that's really cool.
That's very cool. And you did him a favor by having him be already published. He has something under his belt already. So his name is out there, which is great.
Yeah.
He's got a portfolio before probably most kids his age. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Very, very good. Very interesting. If anyone has questions or has anything to contribute, now is your last chance.
Yeah. I'm not sure why someone is saying why tragic. Are you?
I think that was in reference to a conversation that you were having, and I wasn't sure exactly what it was responding to.
I think she might be referring to, and Audrey, you have to tell me if this is correct. My reference to the tragic mulatto. I'm guessing that that's it. So yeah, so that was the term for the trope, the tragic mulatto. Because if you look back at the early stories, like going into the 1800s, the character was written, you'd have a mixed race character. And there is a story called The Quadroons, right? That was written in the 1800s, I believe by an abolitionist. But you have this character who's mixed race, and some of them don't know that they're mixed race until something happens, and they are cut off from the life that they've known, right? And so they realize they have no place in the world, they have no friends, they can't enter into any community, and these characters usually end up committing suicide, right? So that's why it was tragic. Like this is the way the mixed race character was written for a very long time. So that's why it became a trope, the trope of the tragic mulatto.
All right.
Do any of the characters take on my son's characteristics? That's interesting. You know, Tane has an ability to incorporate grief and joy. Like he is a person of wholeness. So I think that he has and I admire that characteristic in him, and I think it's important. So I think that overall, that's just an overall message that's in the book, period, right? And my son is a mixed race child, right? He's, you know, his father is white. So my sense of him, that I always knew that we would raise him with the sensibility of understanding who he was as a person, and that if we could do that, then he wouldn't feel torn between one side or the other, that he would be Tane. And that seems to be the way that he is growing up. So I guess I would want him to be, you know, more like Jeanette and less like Colchester.
Right. Nice. Anyone else? All right.
Well, thank you so much, Sophfronia. I would be curious about it in your bio. Is that collection of essays available, specifically the one about the trope of that you referenced?
Oh, that essay just came out. That's on a Literary Hub.
Okay.
lithub.com. Yeah. If you search for The Soul of a New Narrative, that is out. And I mention a whole list of other of books that feature mixed race characters.
Great. Well, thank you. I will check that out myself. I'd be curious.
You're welcome.
That.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Jennifer, once again for hosting another enlightening book club, and also for your wonderful always book selections. We've read so many different stories, and we've had the great pleasure of having really wonderful and engaging authors such as yourself, Sophfronia. So thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being here. It's really
All
great
right.
to see
And
you.
of course, thank you to all of you who joined us tonight. We love having you here. If you have questions for Jen and follow up, she's always open to receive those, of course. And we wish you a wonderful night.
Yeah. Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Care.
Good night.